Again, my name is John Phillipo. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Education, Leadership, and Technology, located up in the Boston, Massachusetts area. And I'd like to introduce, if I could, very quickly, if I can get all this technology to work, our two panelists, Dr. Dallas Dance, Superintendent of Baltimore County Public Schools, and Thomas Scarice, Superintendent in Madison Public Schools. Now, this is by far and away the most important EdNET session, because it's the only time you get to talk to real customers. So, we're talking to ourselves is okay, but it's not going to get the job done. So we're delighted, Tom, and we're delighted, Dallas, that you'd spend your time and your wisdom with all of us here attending the EdNET conference. I've asked each of our panelists to just give us a brief profile about their school districts, so that'll help you gauge their remarks. We have one question that we'll answer by both, and then we have a series of questions that we'll just randomly banter back and forth, and we'll try to save about 15 minutes for questions from all of you. So I'll start with Thomas, if we could just get a background on Madison Public Schools.
Sure. I'm sure as a vendor you're thinking, wow, Madison, Wisconsin, probably huge, huge district. It's Madison, Connecticut. I have 3,400 kids. I have 320 teachers. I know them all by name. So it's a small district. It's a suburban district in New England. Strong Yankee control mentality, local control, and I've been there for 3 years now. Prior to that, I served as an assistant superintendent, also as a principal, middle school principal of a very urban district in Connecticut. I've worked in 2 different Connecticut's, which we have. But Madison, a very small district, and 3,400 kids.
Thank you. Dallas?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to be here, and just my quick economic development pitch. Make sure that you're enjoying the Baltimore region. Visit the harbor, Under Armour, and so forth. We really do appreciate it. But welcome to Baltimore. I'm Dallas Dance, Superintendent in Baltimore County Public Schools. We are literally a horseshoe around Baltimore City. Baltimore City has roughly 80,000 students. We have 110,000 students. We have 173 school centers and programs, and over 9,000 teachers. So I don't know all teachers by name. I know all principals by name. Literally right now, one of our main objectives is really the second year of Blueprint 2.0, which is driven by a theory of action that's extremely bold, that calls for us to have equitable digital learning environments for every single student, every single school, every single community, which means K-12 going one-to-one, and then giving our students an opportunity to learn a second language prior to graduation, which is starting in 4th grade as opposed to waiting to middle school. So we're really excited around that, and so excited to be here to talk a little bit about how we can have a true connection between our service providers and what we're doing in Baltimore County.
Great. Well, we're delighted, again, that you're here with us. Again, the session will be rather quick. We'll go through the moderation panelists we've done, and then we'll go through some questions and then throw it back to you. But I brought this quote with me after listening to the last session. And you probably have seen this quote from Milton Chen's work that says, as an educator from India, somewhat skeptically, asked a visiting American educator, in America, you test your students a lot, don't you? The American educator replied that indeed, the United States has a national policy that requires testing of all students in certain grades. And the best reply came from our Indian educator friend, who said, here, when we want the elephant to grow, we feed the elephant. We don't weigh the elephant. And I think that's something that I know these superintendents are challenged with. I just got done working with a school district in Florida, and they asked us to assess guidance. In that school district, they gave 183 different tests. The average guidance counselor spends 55% of their time on assessment and accountability. So these are kind of the challenges that our colleagues up here are faced with every day. So let's go to our first question. I'll ask this of both of them, starting with Thomas. It says, which of the reform initiatives are beginning to gain traction, and what needs do you have for better products and programs in order to successfully implement any of these specific education reforms? So that'll be our question to both. Then I have a series of questions we'll bounce back and forth and move on. Thomas?
Well, speaking from this perspective of a small district, one in which local control is a high value in my community, I think everything out there, a lot has gotten thrown against the wall, and there's a little bit of traction on all fronts with all the different initiatives. We're not impacted by school choice and so forth in a community like mine, but largely by the standards movement through the Common Core, obviously through the testing movement, accountability, teacher evaluation systems. Those are all there, and they're all gaining traction, quite frankly, because they're all legislated. Unfortunately, I think they're all kind of staggering along at a snail's pace right now. They're not really gaining the kind of the hearts and souls that most probably would want them to gather. The products and services that would support us would be those that allow customization at my level. If I can speak from my point of view, the more customization, the better. The more that we can address it to what we're working on locally. We've pushed back quite a bit in my district on a lot of the legislation because it's led to a lot of standardization. Like most states, I'm sure, every district has its own nuances, its own culture, its own context. And as a superintendent, my board expects me to protect that. So in order to protect that, I have to be a gatekeeper as to what products come into my district, and as a result, be able to maintain that individuality at the district level. So the standards movement, the testing movement, we're all feeling it. The accountability movement, we're all feeling it. I think the pushback that's happening in Connecticut, we seem to be about a year behind New York, but a lot of my colleagues over the border in New York, it's visceral right now at the local level, and it's trickling down to the parents in particular. And that's where we're feeling a bubble-up effort in our state.
Dallas?
Yeah, so right now, I think our country is just going through so many different things. And just like my colleague, I think the one that's gaining the biggest traction is this whole idea around having a set of standards of what we want students to know and be able to do. We do have the new assessments that are coming down. Some states have gone to the 2 testing consortia. Some have actually developed their own assessments. The evaluations of principals and teachers based on student growth, that's a conversation that was happening before the movements in many states. But the one that I think is gaining the most traction is this whole idea around a set of standards that we want students to know and be able to do across our country. Interestingly enough, when a name was attached to it, that's when a lot of folks started to do major pushback. When it was known as Common Core State Standards. Now you see many states who are pulling back from that, but they're not pulling back from the standards, they're just renaming. So in Maryland now, we have the Maryland College and Career Ready Standards, and a lot of states have done that, they're Common Core. But because the name has been sort of removed from it, it's not been as polarized. I think what we are looking for, in addition to the customization because of the size of our school system, is how do we make sure that we have teachers who are trained? And any systems of professional development, and not just professional development, but quality PD around what the standards are, how deep they are, the level of content knowledge that an individual teacher might need, but also in addition to knowing the standards, what are some new exciting ways in order to teach those standards? I know we'll have vendors who approach us around the formative and summative assessments and so forth, but until, in Maryland we are a park district, until we really know what park looks like, systems are not going to go out here and spend money to figure out whether a vendor has a product that's similar to it or not, whether the vendor is attached to the testing consortia that's developing the items or not. But right now, all systems across the country are trying to figure out how do we train teachers? And not just teachers who are in our schools, but how do we work with institutions of higher learning as new teachers come out into the field as well too. So in Baltimore County, we have roughly 9,000 teachers. Roughly 6,000 of them are impacted by new standards in some way. That's our effort right now. And we realize that's not something we can do in 1 year, but it's something that we're looking to do over the next 3 years in a fully deep dive approach, but then ongoing as the standards will constantly be updated as well too.
Great, perfect. And I think what we've done in that first question is answered both. You know, what's kind of the opportunity and what's working, and we've kind of answered this second question, so I'm actually going to skip it because both of them responded to where the pushback is coming from. And I particularly like the comment that, let's just make it local and rather than something from the federal government.
I could build on one thing that I think we're in kind of an era of opportunity and threats that happen at the same time. The same initiative presents some great opportunities, and then it also presents some threats. One of my fears as kind of the, protector of the pedagogy in my district is that when the technology gets ahead of the pedagogy, we have big problems in the classroom. We get driven to distraction at that point then. We need to have the technology be right where the pedagogy is or just a notch behind it. Otherwise, the pedagogy drowns in the technology in the classroom, the actual instructional strategies. So I have to second the comment that the investment in the improvement, it's all about instruction. It's all about the quality of instruction. The standards and the tests and everything, to me, it's subordinate to the instruction, the quality of instruction. If the technology is ahead of that, then we have problems with that actual classroom instruction.
Totally agree. If I had to add one piece to that, I think the biggest area that we're going to see pushback from over the next probably 2 years is this whole idea around testing. And kind of unique that you brought up the quote with the Indian educator, because right now there have been so many grassroots efforts across the country that's really starting with parents. In terms of how much testing are we doing. We see the secretary actually relax some of the standards. When it comes to standardized testing, we're going to see probably a little bit more of that. When parents start realizing how much time the new test might take. You're going to start seeing some pushback around that. And I think what we would look from our service providers is how do we get back to the idea of what true assessment really is, and that's your formative assessments. And that's where we can have a really good blend of integration with technology, because great teachers do formative assessments every single day. And so he or she will know how well the student is doing and can adjust instruction the next day. And parents don't have pushback on that because they're expecting that. It's the summative assessments where they're sitting down paper, pencil, that are sort of getting the pushback. So I start to see, as I talk to colleagues across the country, the next 2 years, a major pushback with the assessment reform.
Good. And both points are well taken. Again, that quality of instruction and then the formative assessment. I just got done doing a focus group for a school district up in Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I got beat up by a bunch of high school students at Cambridge Ridge and Latin about a month ago, saying, Mr. Phillipo, isn't homework a form of assessment? Isn't my quizzes and my tests? And with this great technology you espouse, aren't we able to correlate my homework results, my quiz results, my test results to high-stake assessment, to the SAT on Saturday? And of course we can. So some of those things we've just got to get back to. So we're going to switch now from the education side of it, and our panelists did a great job there. Let's ask more of a technical type question, if you could. And that question is going to be this. With so many new and emerging vendors in the marketplace, and that's always changing. I mean, it's got to be tough trying to pick the right emerging vendors. And how important is it to look at things like standardization of the technology? We've seen it with the curriculum and the assessment, but also things like standardizing IT in your district, interoperability, integration with existing technology resources, with your staff development programs within your schools, and why? So maybe we could start, Dallas, with you.
Sure. Very timely question, because you guys are having such a great conference here. I think school systems first have to figure out what do they currently have. And there are so many school systems across the country, they're looking for something that works, and so they have numerous products already that's available. Some schools might be using it, some schools might not be using it. It could be that we've just been paying for it without even evaluating to see if it really works or not. But as we move forward, it's extremely important that we have some type of integration and standardization with our products. And what we're looking to do in Baltimore County is we're looking to put all of our systems under one operating umbrella called BCPS 1. When I got here, we had literally 8 different systems that folks were operating based on. And depending on your school, depending on the principal or the leadership, depending on the office, you could be using anything. And we had individuals with 3 or 4 sign-ons. And what we said is that that's not the best way to do business. It's not efficient. And so we literally came together as a team and said, what do we need to provide to students, to teachers, to parents, to administrators, so that we can combine our SIS, our data dashboards, our LMS, our IMS, everything together, so that we can say to the end user, this is the one-stop shop for you. Now, I knew that was a pie-in-the-sky idea when I put it out there. But what I said to our folks is, why don't we develop what we need, and we put out an RFP, and then what will work with vendors is that we'll figure out how to play together in the sandbox. And how do we promote conversations so that to the end user, we're providing the best service? And so we were able to partner with Ingrate, and we were able to partner with Zach Posner, who's the CEO of Ingrate, to say we're going to put together this one-stop shop called BCPS 1. When you log into it, you'll have different modules you'll go to, but to the end user, it's one system for them. And so we're excited around that, but it started with a conversation around what is it that we currently have? How much are we paying for what we currently have? What's the academic return on investment of what we're doing? What's the price point of what we're paying? And are there potential ways we can become more efficient, but also servicing the end user? And that was what we sort of did here. So pretty excited that in year 1 of that, we started with a simple component from folks, because you can't do all that at one time. It's a 3-year process. We're starting with the gradebook. Because we knew that every single teacher has to have an online gradebook. But it was so important to promote standardization and integration with our current systems and have a serious conversation around what are we using and do we still need to use it as we move forward.
Great. And for those of you who've been at EdNET for a long time, I mean, remarkable comments from a superintendent about things like simple sign-on. In starting, you've got to start somewhere. Gradebook's a great place. Tom?
Once again, the opportunity and threat thing comes to my mind here. I mean, I'm a bit of an outlier superintendent in some of my thoughts on this. I think standardization has definitely helped a small district like mine when it comes to a platform, when it comes to student information systems and so forth. Once it creeps over into the classroom instruction and so forth, I coil up. I think that's probably the greatest threat to our education system in the country right now, is how we're starting to homogenize, and that's just from my perspective. When it comes to the systems that go forth in a district, obviously data keeping systems and grade books and so forth, and I'm all for that. But I could roll out 500 Chromebooks like I did last year in my district, and and reach about 1/6 of all my students, and we can have all our networking capabilities and so forth all on one system, standardized. But we just want to ensure access so that we can create more innovation in the classroom. What we don't want to have are scripts, what we don't want to have are programs and all of our folks teaching the same way. And not that I heard that up here at all today, but my fear from a larger perspective is that if we start to standardize, and I see some of that in the Common Core, one of my concerns with it is when we get that homogenization. That's just my little pushback there as an educational leader.
Great. Any closing comments on that? No? Let's go. I'm going to skip this question and go to the, no, we'll go to the next question. All right, so how do we bridge the gap that exists as we move forward from installing the vendor's product to getting it implemented properly, training, you mentioned that, both of you mentioned training, the integration with the other technology you have, to the most important thing, which is utilization by the teachers and support. Now, I once was told by a superintendent the other day that I think I'll pay the vendor based upon the level of teachers' use. That, if they want to sell their product for X, and if I get teacher use up here, that's what I'll pay them. I'm not sure the vendors would deal with that. But how does the level of responsibility shift from the vendor to the school district and back and forth as we go from installation to utilization and support? It really has to be that team effort.
Sure. For me, it's a shared responsibility. It's not one thing we can say the school system is totally responsible or the vendor is totally responsible. There's a shared responsibility. What I always tell vendors, though, is every school system is not a good school system to work with. Just because you can get a contract with it, be very careful what you put your name to. Because in this space, when an individual school system is looking to expand or they're looking to go with a product, they're going to call colleagues first. And whether it's the school system's lack of implementation or the vendor will always be blamed for it. That's just important to know. I think what we've done in our school system, though, is that we have actually been one of the first school systems to have a bi-yearly meeting with all of our service providers. So if you're looking to do business with us through BCPS 1, twice a year, we get together. And so you will literally have Infinite Campus, you'll have Ngrade, you'll have Microsoft in the room, you'll have Discovery Ed in the room, you might have Pearson in the room. Everyone's in the room figuring out what we as a school system need so they can figure out how they're working together to make sure that it's integrated. When you start talking about the classroom, teachers don't care who we're doing business with. They care that at the end of the day, if you're telling me I need to do something or you're giving me access to something, that it's going to work right the first time, because if we give them the access and it doesn't work, they're going to be turned off completely. But what we've done to all of our vendors, we said, look, we're going to play well together in the sandbox, and we have key performance indicators that actually drive some of the work in our contracts. So just like the superintendent's held accountable for making sure that certain benchmarks are met, we do the same thing with our service providers as well too. And so what that does is it says that if you're going to do business with us, we will make sure that X happens, but you will make sure that Y happens. And that literally there is always a project manager assigned to every vendor we have, so that if something's not working, the project manager is responsible for reaching out to the vendor to figure out what we can do as a school system and what the vendor can do to make sure to the end user it's working. But we figured out that with the collaboration efforts we have with our bi-yearly meetings, that we've been able to solve many of the problems early on because the project managers are assigned, and then everyone's getting around the table at least twice throughout the school year.
Perfect. Tom?
I just have to second what I think Dr. Dan's referring to there is that it all comes down to relationships with the vendor and who you're working with. Especially a smaller district like mine, we don't really have folks on staff to provide the on-site tech support. We're a skeletal crew that can do that, so having the relationship, having the support provided on-site as much as possible. Real clear example came to, we work with Infinite Campus, and a little bit unique in Connecticut, we have a trimester system in our high school as opposed to a traditional semester model. And it could be quirky working with a system that way. Infinite Campus was right there with us, right on site, supporting us, walking our new principal and new administrative team through the whole process, allowing us to still innovate within the system. So any kind of on-site support for us, turning the responsibility over to us, but our capacity is not quite like a large district. So we definitely rely a great deal on the technical expertise coming into our district and coaching us along, and that on-demand support being there.
Perfect. And this is a great segue into the next question, because Dallas, you mentioned superintendent accountability, and Tom, you mentioned relationship. This is kind of a loaded question, but I don't think we have to take this question literally. We can just look at it and try to find ways to look at it. But the question is, since many education executives have performance-based contracts, so I'm always getting calls from superintendents saying, listen, John, if I'm going to spend, that $6 million, and I get paid based upon results. I remember having a conversation one time with Rudy Crew when he was in New York City around this discussion, and sharing with that. Well, at a minimum, we're good at writing performance functional requirements of the technology, but maybe we have to put some key performance indicators. And maybe or maybe not, but I doubt it, the vendor will agree that based upon results, they'll get paid more, like our colleagues get paid more. But the interesting part is really that question about how do we get there? How do we say, okay, if I get with Infinite Campus or with this vendor or that vendor, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to improve parental engagement? Student engagement? So let's just take that apart. Dallas?
I think it starts with a system asking themselves, what is it that we're trying to accomplish overall as a goal? Based on what we're trying to accomplish, then what might be the best service that we can get to help us accomplish that goal? I do see many school systems that will go to a conference and they'll see a great product and they come back and they say, we want to implement this. Without some type of definitive goal of what you're trying to accomplish, then you're just going to get a contract with someone and you're going to be sort of a haphazard in the implementation of it. In terms of your previous story, I don't know, as a vendor or as a superintendent, I would be in favor of that myself. But I've been very fortunate that we've worked with service providers who have said, we're on the ground with you, we will support you, let us know what we need to do. And they don't have a problem with the KPIs being, being in the contract or everything, because we're not holding them accountable for something that we should be doing. And in the previous example you gave, teacher usage can be a lack of leadership. It has nothing to do with the vendor at all. And it's unfortunate and it's disingenuous to hold the vendor accountable for something that we should be doing on our end. But there are certain things that we can do together. So if we see that teacher usage is down, what are some things that we as a school system can do and the vendor can do together, knowing that our KPIs are linked together? When a Board of Education gives the superintendent the power of a $1.6 billion budget, they are expecting to be using those dollars in an efficient manner. When you literally have about 15% that you're working with that's outside of salaries and benefits. But with that comes a huge responsibility to make sure that the evaluation stage is taking place. So based on the goal we wanted to accomplish and the service model we've gone with, what is it that we can be doing every single quarter, every single semester, every single year to make sure that the level of service is still able to get to the end user the way we anticipate it to be. But I've not come across any vendors, and I have several service providers in the room today, the BCPS, who've had a problem with that because we're not just putting all the ownership on them, it's a shared responsibility.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Tom?
I agree 100%. It definitely is shared. And just to pop up at 10,000 feet for a second, I'm cautious and not cynical, but skeptical anytime in education that we fix hard on numbers and data. My experiences I've seen, I'm talking classroom, but I'll talk now system-wide as well. I've seen a bit of a distortion and a corruption to cater to that number, and it comes at a cost. It comes at a cost to what do we take off of the ball behind us because that number becomes front and center. I've seen it happen to classroom teachers. When you give them a couple of numbers they have to watch in the classroom and suddenly the instruction becomes a bit corrupted, not cheating, just gaming the system. And I've also seen it happen system-wide as well. So I think it's a bit of a human dynamic that we have to be very cautious about because we can feel good about the numbers at the end of the day, but then what lies in our wake? There's the kind of gaudy headlines of testing scandals and so forth and cheating, but I see more the day-to-day that concerns me, and I can kind of extend that to these types of measures as well. Anytime that we have measures and we hyper-focus on them, though that might be your industry or a private industry type approach, I think it does creep over in education, but I'm just always cautious and skeptical about that. I think the shared piece and the relationship piece, as Dallas said, is exactly what it's about.
Excellent. And again, a good example of just leadership that we all need. Leadership, and certainly on your part and your colleagues. Let's go to the next question. How do we increase stakeholder engagement in the needs analysis, procurement, and implementation process? So I just tell you, one of these top 10 urban school districts in the country actually is in Florida. We're helping them procure a new student information system. So along the way, I said to them, well, we're going to run focus groups with students. And they thought that was heresy. Like, I got to tell you, I went to a middle school, and there were 20 middle school students running around. First, tell me about how they were getting into their parents' portal for the grade book, ahead of their parents, and trying to tip them off as to what's on there, and how they got the password and how they rig it. But they made me an hour and 10 minutes late for a meeting with the superintendent of schools to report out because they kept saying, Mr. Phillipo, I got one more comment. And we ended that meeting at 4:30. And earlier this morning, people brought that up, the student engagement. I mean, they know what they want in a learning management system. Like I said, the Cambridge public school students were clear. They want a learning management system that correlates homework results, quiz results, test results to the SAT. And so these students, so how do we do that? Because it's not always, that's not always the way we do business.
Well, I think you have to start off with you valuing it as a leader that's important. And realizing that you as a superintendent can easily say you're going to do something and that the school system's going to do it, that's where the implementation will fail. Folks are doing it because you've said to do it. When we built our strategic plan, which is, again, a pretty bold plan, we literally had over 3,000 people involved in that process, which included students. As we went to develop the RFP for BCPS 1, when we were looking to develop it, we had students, teachers, parents, community members who didn't even have kids in our school, everyone at the table along with us there, even when we were evaluating the bids that had come in for it, knowing that to the end user, it has different levels. So the student's view of the end user is going to be different from a parent or from a teacher, so they all need to be at the table for it. And then once we get to the evaluation phase, quarterly semester at the end of the year, all parties are at the table back again to figure out what works, what didn't work. Again, we've been very, very fortunate as we work with service providers. If we need to make tweaks on the student end, to the parent end, to the teacher end, they've been more than accommodating to us to do that. But I don't think any leader, whether it's a school system or a business, whatever, would ever say we're going to do something without having the appropriate stakeholder input or engagement in that process.
Excellent.
John, you answered the question about the student. Interviewing the student is critical. That personal touch. As far as engagement, involvement is commitment. So getting fingerprints from all folks involved as much as you can. 3,000 folks. I mean, I only have 3,400 kids in my district, so I applaud the work you did there in a large setting to do that. To get that involvement piece, I'm thinking of the theme of this session, Educator Pushback. The pushback from my perspective locally is that the opportunities to do that kind of work are becoming a little bit more few and far between because the prescription of legislation, I imagine other states are like Connecticut, is getting so specific that having individual input at the local level, it's few and far between, and it's frustrating. And that's where our pushback is coming from the most, at least where I am, that those opportunities to get people involved, to get their hands kind of, in the kitchen and what we're going to create, it's becoming less so. We're being told by our State Department of Ed, you must do X, Y, Z, and you must do it that way. And what we're finding out is we can pay for someone's back, but we can't buy their heart. And that's where we're kind of losing if we keep going down that road, is we can't get the commitment part because we're being told what to do more than engaging people like Dallas is referring to. So we're a bit of a rebel in our state. Our district right now is, we're a couple of things kind of flying under the radar in my district because we are trying to do things in a way that we feel is right by our community and right by our kids. It's a shame that we have to do it that way, but it's really to get to what Dallas is referring to get people around the table. There's no greater moment that I have. I spend, every 2 weeks, I spend about 4 or 5 hours where I shadow one student at any different level of the system. So I literally enter my high school at 7:30, I sit with the kid, we talk about the day, and then I follow them around for 4 or 5 hours and we debrief at lunch. I do the homework, well, at least I try to do the homework, and we spend that time together. I learn more in that time period than any board meeting, any survey that I can give to a community or students, just by sitting and talking to the students. So that type of engagement, that human element there is so critical.
And again, we're all enlightened by both of those comments, and I like the part where you start where you want to end. So where you started with that engagement at the very beginning, because it's not about, we want engagement because we want to get a new student system. We really want to get that early on.
Absolutely. It goes to your first part of the question with the whole needs assessment. And again, a system has to have a goal they're trying to accomplish. And without a type of goal, you're just purchasing a product and not necessarily knowing what's going to be the implementation of it. So if you have a goal, then you can engage the appropriate stakeholders around the table in terms of what do you need in order to accomplish that goal, and then how does a product potentially fit into it. But with the whole implementation process, we've been very fortunate as we work with service providers that we start slow to go fast. And so how do we make sure in a system our size, we, as opposed to scaling up something in 173 schools, we start with 10. And we have 10 very bold leaders. We have leaders who will be honest with us. We have a service provider who, they care about business, but they care more about the reputation of the company. Knowing that if it works well here, we're going to be a reference for them later on in another school system. And so they're on the ground with us in the pilot phase as we scale it up to figure out what it needs to do to work for all schools.
Great. And that engagement, go ahead.
Sometimes I find that a product or a vendor will come to us with a solution, kind of looking for a problem to solve.
Right.
And if in an era of tight budgets, in an era of we have to keep up with the legislation that just comes cascading down, I think it's so seductive to just say, just buy it, just get it, because we have to solve the problem they're telling us to solve. I think that's where we're going to see blowback over the next few years. And what happens is, as an institution, we kind of get that institutional ADD where the vendor comes, we create the problem because we have the solution already, and then a few years later, we're going to blame the vendor. Okay, because I want to, keep my job, so we're going to blame the vendor, and then find the next problem to solve with the next solution.
And again, we've seen it all the time. I mean, these are enlightened leaders, and many of you sell to enlightened school districts. But again, the particular school I was referring to earlier had a focus group of like 200 teachers, and the question was, how many of you have access to student information system, the older one they have, in the last 2 months? And 2 people raised their hand, and one said to me, John, it's easier to talk to a teacher in Japan than it is to connect with the information about our students. And so these are the kind of integration issues that we've got to get to. Our last question before we open it up is, since educators only purchase certain products and programs, such as a student system or learning management system once every 10 or 20 years, and vendors sell their products to services to schools almost every day, how can we work together to build a more comprehensive total cost of ownership model? Because you don't know how many times we get called in to a district that's seemingly got a failed implementation, but it really is they ran out of money. They got past the procurement phase and they bought it, then they got it installed, then they got it implemented, and that's pretty much where we struggle. But all of you know as vendors, you truly do know what it costs to truly make your product used and useful. And so how might we do that? Dallas?
I think it goes back to just the whole needs analysis piece. What is it we're trying to accomplish? What do we need in order to accomplish it? And SIS is probably one of the the most major purchase that a school system will make. Because if the implementation doesn't work, everything that you need and have on a student is lost. In addition, it's the one system you're expecting every single person to use every single day. More than likely, your teacher's taking attendance for it, student data's in, and so forth. And so the data have to be accurate, and the implementation has to go well. My advice to vendors is really to ask tough and critical questions in terms of what are you looking for in a product. And it could very well be that your product doesn't meet that need. And it could very well be that if your product meets that need, be very upfront and honest around what is the total cost of ownership for your product. And in an effort to get into many school systems, a lot of vendors, what they'll do is they'll shave parts of off the proposal, and particularly the parts they shave is around the professional development, which is where most of the money should be, in fact, going. Because if folks aren't trained on it, then they're not going to use it, or it's going to be a shoddy implementation of it, and they're going to blame the school system's going to blame the vendor. And so if we're going to shave any type of cost off the proposal, let's make sure that the professional development costs, because all of our money is going to be in people. How do we make sure that we have the right people on the ground supporting a school system through implementation? And the other thing, too, with an SIS system, because it's such a major system, you have to, again, start slow to go fast. And it could very well be, and we're doing it in Baltimore County right now, a school system has to operate from 2 systems for a period of time. And it's crazy on the staff. But in order to have a full implementation later on, it's well worth it. To make sure that we can smoothly integrate it into our operation, that those 10 pilot schools, they have access to it first. And we're supporting it with boots on the ground to make sure that it works there. And then we're building it out over sort of the next 3 years. But knowing that if it doesn't work well in a small set of schools, in a school system our size, it's not going to work in 173 schools. And with political pressures on boards of ed now, if it doesn't work well, any initiative, whether it's an SIS or one-to-one, whatever, they're going to pull out of it. And ultimately, they're going to direct the superintendent to pull out of it. And then ultimately, the reputation of the vendor is at stake then, because the school system will take the heat, but the vendor will take the heat as well, too. So starting slow to go fast, but making sure there's adequate resources in professional development.
Great. Tom?
I don't know what kind of appetite there is in the field for districts my size. I don't know. I suppose if you add all of us up, we're as big as a Baltimore. But the personal touch and really getting to know the needs of our district. As I was listening to Dallas talk, I'm thinking to myself, the last RFP that came out of my district about a month ago, I wrote. I didn't have somebody beneath me to kind of direct them. I actually went to a workshop on writing RFPs. They didn't teach me that in superintendent school, how to write RFPs. So I had to actually figure, what am I doing here? I had to figure that out. I don't have a team. My cabinet is 5 people. My building administrators are 10. $53 million budget. But I'm sure the aggregate of all those districts across the country, I mean, you look at Texas, for example, I was talking to Fadi before about this, that 80% of the district is probably the size of my district.
Right.
So knowing the needs and knowing what a district like mine would need to thrive in this kind of partnership. And I can tell you the first thing that I would say is, please help me to know which questions to ask. I'm a teaching and learning expert. I'm not an expert on these designs. I'm not an expert on total cost of ownership models and so forth. That's not my bag, okay? So I need someone to come in here and be able to help me project out 3, 4, 5 years and so forth. I can think of the last initiative in many districts in my state was smart boards. Okay, smart boards, 5, 7, 8 years ago. Okay, a lot of them are languishing because nobody really at the outset said, by the way, in 5 years, you're gonna need an obsolescence replacement plan because those are gonna go. Okay, now, the student information systems I know have a longer shelf life, but a lot of the technology that comes out here does not. And we burned ourselves in my state and in my district because we weren't asking those questions, and we really can use that support because that technical support is not there. The PD, as Dallas said, top. It's number 1 on the list. There's no question. Nothing will sustain itself without the right training, but also helping us, getting in our minds of what our needs are, and then helping us ask those right questions.
Perfect. Okay, let's switch gears then. Let's go to the next, which is now to bring questions from the audience. So as the slide up here says, now let's transition from a dialogue and discussion with our panelists to questions from the audience. And I want to make sure that we pick up what Dallas said earlier, which is they have well-defined vision and direction for their school districts. Sometimes I get into the dialogue with the districts and the vendors, they haven't read it. So let's do that. But Frank, go ahead.
Thank you. One question I have is a number of startups as well as established companies are moving to a freemium model where basically teachers get stuff for free and then they assume somehow districts may buy them or the individual schools may buy them. How realistic is that? And have you ever purchased something that came up bubbling up that way?
Tom first.
I've ever purchased something that came free and then with the expectation I'd follow up. I'm not sure I understand the question.
Follow up
So basically a number of products that are out there are free at the classroom level or the individual teacher level, and then if you want to roll it up at the school or district level, you pay for various customization reports and so on.
Okay. I can't right now think of a time I actually did that in my district or prior to my district. It's a bit seductive. Once again, I think it almost goes down the road, if it's not customizable, it goes down the road of a solution looking for a problem. And I think that's the mantra that I keep with my leadership team and my teachers is that we have a direction, it's crystal clear. We know where we're headed. It was a very grassroots campaign to establish that vision. Everything we do, we've got to filter through that, which I think is where Dallas was going also with the strategic plan and the focus of even district that large. So it's an interesting concept. I think I'm just really picky when it comes to products. I want to make sure that we're not moving generally west, that we're actually on a course and we're headed that direction.
From our experience, when you have roughly 9,000 teachers, everyone's doing something you don't know about. And you encourage that depending on what they're doing.
Want them doing.
No, you encourage it depending on what they're doing.
Yeah.
But from my own experience right now, the grade book option that we were doing through NGrade was a free solution. When we decided when the panel decided to pick NGrade as the solution for BCPS 1, or I should say the background solution to it, we noticed that 3,000 of our teachers were already using that product. So to scale it up to 6,000 more teachers, we knew that we'd get a bigger bang for our buck because a third were already comfortable with it, and they were going to be sort of the mouthpieces to their colleagues. I always tell companies to be very cautious of that. There is one very successful large company now that we all probably know in this room that will remain nameless that started with a free solution, and now they're trying to take it to where you're paying for it. And there are a lot of teachers right now who are asking the districts, can you do this for us? And a district's very leery to have sort of an organic product like that become a system-wide product without figuring out what's the goal we're trying to achieve. But we have teachers out there who are innovators in their own right, who I really encourage that and I champion it. But if something's going to go to scale system-wide, there has to be a goal that we're trying to accomplish before that happens.
Okay, next person. If you just give your name and who you're with, and we'll get a response.
Ann Flynn, National School Boards Association. A couple of years ago, we launched a program called the Tech Innovation Showcase to look at emerging and startup companies and to share what could be done with technology that couldn't be enabled otherwise without those tools to help school leaders and especially school boards stay abreast of some of the innovations in the field. I'm just wondering from the perspective of the two superintendents, how a startup company is viewed by you compared to more established companies. What does it take from a startup to catch your eye, and how should they approach being successful with schools?
Great.
You can take that one first,
Oh,
Dallas.
Dallas, go ahead.
I would say it depends. I don't think that, and I'm colleagues with several large system superintendents and small system. I don't think anyone goes into it saying we want a well-established company to do this, but it does depend on what you're trying to achieve. If it's an SIS, yes, you want to make sure someone has a reputation behind it. They work with a system your size so that they can actually be able to scale it for you. But if you're looking for another solution, a startup could totally work for you on that one. So it depends. I think what school systems look for is someone who actually values the relationship more so than the contract. Because if it's a relationship, you're tied to the success of whatever it is that you want to work within our school system for. So some of the best service providers I work with, their conversation started with, tell me a little bit more about X in your plan. You know, how are you trying to accomplish X? Knowing that if depending on my answers, they may be able to have a solution for something if we've not thought about it just yet. But they're very much familiar with Blueprint 2.0, which then sparks a separate conversation well beyond their product. So I know that person cares about the students in Baltimore County, not necessarily getting the contract in Baltimore County.
Great. So a small community at a board meeting, if we're moving forward with something, one of the first questions is going to be, how long have they been doing this? So they're going to be asking that question, they're going to want to know, and if I'm out on a limb saying, well, they're a startup, however, I'm going to need a lot of support, and the relationship piece, as Dallas mentioned as well, that's a really big deal. But I do think that there is also an added benefit when it comes to the fact that, at least perceptions now, so this is perception of a local board, well, it's a startup, and they probably want to make a name for themselves, and we have a good reputation as a district in Connecticut, so they really want to make it successful, so they're going to work extra hard for us to make it work and then showcase our district. So that's a reality, and we have played that in the past. We have used that card in the past, and it's served us well.
And Ann, I'd add in to the answer to these questions is what happens if that company is sold? And so when we write specifications on behalf of these superintendents and our clients around the country and around the world, we have very specific language as to what the options are of the school district and the financial consequences of that company being bought and sold. And we've learned that the hard way as well, that we're there to protect their interests.
Absolutely.
Hi, David Rust with Sandhill Consulting Group. I guess the question is more for Dallas, but Thomas perhaps has some input too. You talked about the concept of bringing vendors together, and you might say competitive vendors in some cases, and that you've apparently had some good experience with a routine of them working together to help address issues in the system. So this is a two-part question. The first is, what kind of concrete positive aspects of that collaboration have you observed? And secondly, do you see them addressing the stakeholder engagement issue, being any part of the solution of the stakeholder engagement?
Very good question. I will tell you, I've seen success on the qualitative level from it because we've had to move the room, meaning that we started with a room of about 50 people, and now we have roughly 75 people who want to come. Now, we're going to have to limit it at some point to make sure that it's productive. But what you have is you have service providers who want to bring other people from their company with them to make sure they hear the same thing they're hearing. So it's not sort of I tell you what was said, but that you hear it directly from the school system based on what they need. I'm not a person who believes that folks should stay in their lanes. I believe that I'm a person that if we want the end result to be maximum for kids, then we have to understand the integration that must happen from all sides. So I do get very encouraged when I see service providers in a room talking about what they're currently working on right now, but hearing system-wide what we're trying to do and what other service providers are doing to sort of help that need out as well too. Now, what I also see with that is collaboration with the vendors in terms of, well, we can't necessarily do this, or you might be able to do this a little bit better than we've been able to do it. I think what we also do too, and superintendents do this all the time, is we tell them if it works here, understand that you'll be able then to share that story with other school systems. If it doesn't work here, though, then that's not a story we'll be able to share. And seeing me in the room, seeing my chief academic officer in the room, that helps vendors say to themselves, okay, if the leadership is there from the top, I can go out on a limb and actually do this as well, too. So we've been seeing some extreme success from it. Our next meeting literally is in November as well, too, where we'll talk about sort of where we've gone over the last 6 months since our last meeting. But the fact that we've had to change rooms gives me extreme hope, because now we have other service providers who want to be involved in that conversation as well.
Great. Next question.
Hello, my name's Snehal Patel, founder, CEO of SokiCom. We're a social and adaptive game-based math program. And my question is, for other sort of innovative early stage programs out there, how would you recommend that you become aware of these programs? How should we kind of reach out to your district leadership teams to determine, even if there's any type of fit between what innovative programs may provide and whether there is a need at the district's end?
Yeah, that's a good question. How do you find out, Tom, what's coming down the road, what's available to you?
I think that most often we find out in places like this, we find out in conferences, we find out kind of in self-pursuits, professional growth. It's a lot of homegrown, researching on the part of teachers, instructional leaders, and so forth. I don't have a silver bullet that I would say, here's the pathway to reach us, because there's so many little disparate districts out there. I'd say there's a benefit to a bit of the standardization for someone like yourself then, where we're kind of working on similar standards now. But I do know that there's districts also looking to, like mine, for example, customize as much as possible. But as far as locating that, I think it's been more us on fish hunts, kind of trying to find something to fit us rather than people reaching out to us. I haven't really experienced that in a district my size.
Okay.
Two quick things. I'd say conferences just like this. But you look around the room, these are all your colleagues. This is your conference right here. But there are numerous conferences that are out there that are geared toward teachers, they're geared toward IT specialists. If you're trying to reach someone on the back end with networking, there's COSIN that you work with. You're trying to reach teachers, there's ISTE you work with. If you're trying to reach folks, it's ASCD, NASSP, which is the secondary school principals, NAESP, which is the elementary school principals. Everyone sort of has their national conference there. And you can actually set up through your exhibit hall where folks can come through and just walk through. Now, I've always seen where folks stop because there's chocolate involved, but I'm not endorsing that. But usually if something attracts someone's attention, whether it's a video, chocolate, whatever, you're going to then be able to have a conversation. And then the school superintendents, we have our national superintendents conference in February of every year. This year it's in San Diego, where literally you'll have roughly at least 8,000 superintendents there having conversations with colleagues around what's working, which leads me to the second thing. Once you get into a school system, it has to first be the right school system, because then it becomes word of mouth, where if you're looking for a solution to something, you're going to be more than apt to call your colleague and say, what are you doing to work on math in your system? Or I have an issue with middle school math, which is really what we just did, and our board is approving a contract with a service provider next Tuesday at this meeting, because a colleague was the one who referenced us to that vendor.
And I would add, the educational service agencies that service a lot of the small school districts. People like Tom go there and expect them to help, get 20 so. And again, like this question says, these education leaders have a well-defined plan. If you've got a way to help them, they're all ears. One more question and then we'll close up. Go ahead.
Hi, Jean Fleming from NWEA. Interesting to me that I haven't heard either of you mention student privacy, student data concerns as a part of the pushback. So I'm curious whether you are hearing that from parents or teachers. And then for the audience here, how can we as vendors help you with that?
Yeah, we definitely are in Connecticut, and it's getting louder and louder in my district in particular. I've had parents reach out to me personally. That's the size of the district I have. Is they call my office, I say, hello, Superintendent Scarice. And we have had those concerns. From a teacher perspective now, once again, through the legislation and policy, we're trying to quantify teacher performance, reduce it to a singular number, which I personally think is preposterous, but we're doing that by law now. And those numbers are being sent to the State Department of Education. There's a big concern about is that open to the public under Freedom of Information Act? There's obviously the professional educator. I'll get back to the student side. As the tests become more online, as the tests become more in the cloud and so forth, there's a big question about FERPA in our district right now. Parents are raising those concerns. I was expecting more of a pushback conversation in this part here, so I'll just
Right.
put that plug there. I think we're seeing really the beginning of a bigger pushback now.
Yeah.
I don't think that this is going to die away. I think we're getting the blowback from the way things have unfolded over the last 3 or 4 years. Privacy is probably the biggest pushback lever on the parent side, though the testing concerns are definitely there. I think we're seeing the beginning of privacy. I think especially as the new assessments start to come out there, whether the 2 consortia or others tests, I think it's just the beginning.
I think school superintendents are looking for some type of rules and guidance from the U.S. Department of Ed, a little bit more around this. Matter of fact, last week in a conversation with a few of those officials, we were just talking about that. But I think school systems also have to do a better job of just educating parents around FERPA, around the types of data that we've always collected on students as well. But I think because education has become so sort of polarized now, it's become so political now, the conversations are going to come up more and more in terms of if you have new tests for students, what are you gathering on my child? How is that secure? Who are you sharing it with? And I think that we as educators, and this is where you potentially can help us as service providers, can help with that, because as other folks get themselves into that conversation, it doesn't help, it hurts. But I think we can do a better job holding town halls with families, sending home information around what FERPA is, what it isn't, what is it that we gather on students versus what we don't, but also what is it that we share versus what we don't. And I do think that's a conversation that will happen over the next year as the new tests are rolled out. I know COSIN just issued some guidelines as well. They partner with, and the second part of the organization is escaping me, but they just partnered to establish some sort of guidelines for school systems on what is privacy, how can you share it with parents, what's collected, what's not collected, to sort of help them out as they have those conversations, because it is pretty tough as a superintendent in front of parents when they're asking, why you want this information, and you've been given the guidance from the State Department or the Federal Department of Ed, and you don't necessarily know extremely why we are gathering that piece of information. So as much guidance as we can get, particularly from a COSIN or from the Department of Ed, and from U.S. service providers as you interact with not just those 2 organizations, but other systems as well too, would actually be extremely beneficial to superintendents.
That's great. And again, I'd add very quickly 2 points to that. One of the concerns, obviously, is sharing that data with you, the vendors. That's obviously a problem. We saw that last year with a particular company that's not around anymore. So we've got that question of make the data accessible. We've got it, make it accessible and usable. Then we've got the security, obviously, and that's what our question was. And then reliable. I mean, it's got to be reliable data, and it's got to be accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I mean, constantly I get teachers, John, that grade book, I go to do it on Sunday night at 10 o'clock, and half the time it's down. And how many school districts work on a 24/7 clock? Very few, if any. So our colleagues made sure, they said, now, John, just make sure they know that we're giving our best advice we can to the audience, but we don't want to be liable, for anything. So I have a slide that helps them out with that. And before I close it out, I always use this slide. There's more to networking than just hooking things up. There's more to technology. You're welcome to use the slide. You're just not able to put a company's name or the superintendent's names on those donkeys, okay? That's the deal there. And then I often end any of my work with this quote here, and it's an interesting quote because of what Albert Einstein never saw. And that is, computers or technology. Let's take out the word computers, but technology is incredibly fast, accurate, and stupid. Humans are incredibly slow, inaccurate, and brilliant. Together, they're powerful beyond imagination. And that's what we have with these 2 leaders. So again, welcoming and thanking them for their time and energy today and their thoughts. Thank you.